We see it already, I think, in terms of the electric vehicle space a lot, and a lot more as well in the autonomous vehicle space. And those two spaces often go hand in hand. In that, where you see again this kind of a lot of the OEMs are partnering up now with a lot of software houses or software companies in order to produce that whole end-to-end solution. Now, one of the things which is really interesting there again is how can a portfolio manager, if you are someone who is looking at this problem, what can you do? What can you bring to the table in order to best serve both parties' interests? And there's a lot of thought which needs to be given in terms of the identification of the IP rights which are associated with it, the creation of the companies. We see collaborations all the time with OEMs and software houses for autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles at the same time. And so it provides another dimension, I think, in terms of how people are going to have to think about managing their portfolios there, because the opportunity for cross-licensing, it seems to be more and more relevant at this stage, because what might come out of one collaboration might become the industry standard. Nobody really knows at the moment. We're in such a state of flux that, again, coming back to this point of trying to keep as many options open seems to be the real key aspect here.
Yeah, and it's not just having these collaboration agreements with carefully selected partners. It's also being aware of the IP that's owned by other businesses and the fact that your technology is going to overlap with their technologies.
Yes.
And although you can negotiate bilateral agreements, if you can identify who the key rights holders are, often that's just not practical in terms of how much time that would take you to negotiate or to identify the relevant rights holders and to negotiate. So bearing in mind the difficulties that companies can have in identifying rights holders and actually negotiating those agreements, is there another route that they might go down that could be a bit easier for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and we've seen one of these big developments which has happened over the last couple of years is this entrance of the telecoms market into the electric vehicle space and the automotive space in general. So one of the biggest rights holders in the automotive space are old telecom companies. So, for example, Nokia, who are actively licensing their telecoms portfolios for the purpose of in-car connectivity. So these days, no one's going to want a car which you can't interact with your phone to. It's a standard feature these days. We hear all the old cliches about an electric vehicle now is an iPad on wheels, and to a certain extent that is true, because there's so much of this integrated technology which exists in there, and the requirement and the need for people to be able to interact with for the vehicles to either to be able to communicate with each other or to interact with telecom standards is essential now. And so now we're seeing the development and the advancement of patent portfolio pools or patent pools which exist. So people are able to essentially to purchase into these pools. So in order to license the technology out, there is a certain amount of debate which about the royalty rates which exist around and how much should be paid. Perhaps something for another day. On that, essentially, we now have the ability for patent portfolio holders or companies to be able to license these technologies on a simple basis, really, just through the use of these pools. But it does also mean that it has created some form of tension, which perhaps wasn't there a couple of years ago, and that is something which will need to be looked at in terms of especially developing your own portfolio as a company. Because whilst you might not be able to license directly to a telecoms company, because they wouldn't particularly be interested in potentially the heavy engineering side of things. But there is also your own form of development which exists, and there's also the ability, when we talked about collaborations as well, as to what can you also bring to a collaboration at some stage.
And at the moment, these licensing organisations and pools like Avanci for 5G, they're very much focused on the telecoms IP and giving automotive companies a way in which they can be free from worrying about infringing the rights that are licensed by that pool. It does make me wonder whether that's something that we might see with other types of technology relating to electrification. So whether we end up having standard essential patents for electrification
Yes.
that end up being subject to pools. And if innovators are working in that area, they need to have protection for those innovations. So Diego, how can EV manufacturers be prepared in order to protect their IP portfolios?
Yeah. No, I think this is a really good point. We already see, for example, potentially the setting of legislative standards around driver assist technology on that. And so you could easily see a patent pool being set up around, if you wanted, for example, lane assist technology, there would have to be a set of standard patents which you'd have to implement in order to abide by the legislation. The same you could also easily see in terms of electrification. If everybody's going to have the need to charge their car up overnight between when they get home from work, having a standardized technology in that area isn't the biggest stretch of the imagination. There's easily the potential for that to happen.